and we will move on to David Miller, the director of the Princeton Faith Work Initiative, and we will hear about succeeding without selling your soul. So I saw David. Welcome.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Quick sound check. Are we good? You hear me? All right. So I could barely hear myself because I'm on the edge of some sort of cold or bug. So the voice coming out of my mouth is from some strange alien. It's not me. Hopefully you can hear me. Um, so first of all, it's an honor to be part of this, to serve and support Brett on the advisory council and the whole team. It's a delight to be with you. Greg, we haven't seen each other in a while or spoken in a while, but thank you for your inspiring and spot on opening remarks. In fact, I want to use that as a transition to what Brett and Corey have asked me to talk about. You talked about sort of an entrepreneurial mindset, and I'd like to talk about an ethical mindset, because you can have all the faith in the world, whatever one's tradition is, and all the grounding, and yet, as the scriptures say, and we run into situations we don't know what to do. Or as the Apostle Paul would say, we do that which we know we ought not to do. So I'm really interested in how we can take young men and women in the classroom, as well as executives, which is another part of my life and advisory work I do, but in particular for the purposes of this call, how do we shape and inform these amazing young minds all around the world and the different cultures we come from so that they can hopefully not become a statistic of a very talented or gifted person who made some missteps, which ultimately cost them perhaps their career, their marriage, their health, many other things. So with that depressing start, let me suggest a couple ideas for you. So here's my context. I teach at Princeton University. It's an R1 research university. Although it has strong Presbyterian roots, you wouldn't know that as you walk around campus. It's a secular research university, unabashedly so. And that's fine, because that's the world that before going into academia, I was in industry in the private sector and tech for several years in the States, and then in finance in London for 8 years. So I understand the secular world, and I also understand the world of people of faith who are living in the secular world. So I've been teaching a course, for over 15 years now. I used to call it something like modern theology and ethics, and then professional responsibility and ethics. And the students all kind of yawned at those titles. And they nicknamed the course, unbeknownst to me, Succeeding Without Selling Your Soul. Succeeding Without Selling Your Soul. So, and of course, we could all debate what succeeding means, and that's part of the course that we talk about. But I have now renamed the course Professional Responsibility and Ethics, Succeeding Without Selling Your Soul. And I'm just going to tell you, Brett and Corey have asked me just to briefly describe that course a little bit in hopes that maybe there's a nugget or two that you could incorporate or add to your already robust and successful syllabi and teaching techniques. So a bit of the context. So it's an elective. It's not a required course. I have a whole range of students from computer science majors to international studies majors, the humanities, engineering, sciences, you name it, they're from all over. So that is really interesting to me, that also they self-select, take the course from a variety of disciplines. And there's not a lot of electives that people have in a degree program at Princeton. So they're using one of their rare cards to play to take this course. Second, I want to say that I use, as many of you maybe do, anonymous-based polling in the class. So I can ask a question, what's your religious identity, or what's your this or your that demographic information without fear of violating anyone's privacy. And I know year in, year out that, because Princeton's very international student body, people from all over the world, and year in and year out, somewhere between 23 and 25% of the students will self-describe as being atheists or agnostics. Yet, whoa, they're taking the course. Like, why is that? Well, they tell me it's a few things. One, they're curious. They're looking for meaning and purpose in life, and they haven't really found it in the alternative sources. They're fed up with organized religion, maybe have had bad experiences with a different denominational experience, but they're curious to hear about the course and what we talk about. So moving into it, the way most, and maybe not in your schools, but what I've encountered most business ethics courses or professional responsibility courses, they're either taught by lawyers, so you get a jurisprudence perspective to it, or they're taught by philosophers, sort of secular Greco-Roman philosophers or whatever the philosophy schools are that you teach. And that's interesting. And I think that's important. We need both legal minds and we need secular philosophical minds. But what I've found in the past couple of decades, it's been a gross, almost professional misconduct that the academy, particularly if it's not a religious school, if it's a public school or a state school or a private school like Princeton, that religion, the wisdom, the intelligence, the ideas from religious thought have been excised from the curriculum. And I tell you, I would put Maimonides, uh, Aquinas from centuries ago against any of the modern philosophers, even the Enlightenment philosophers, let alone today. So what I'm doing in this course is giving students intellectual permission to draw on religious ideas and to make very clear to the students this course, I have a little opening speech I give. This course is not about whose belief system or worldview is right or wrong. That's not an unimportant question. Some would say it's a life and death question, but that's not what this course is about. This course is about recognizing there's wisdom. I think Augustine and others have said all truth is God's truth. So if they find wisdom in different traditions, and how can you draw on that today? In many cases, several thousands of years after these traditions were founded or emerged, how can they help you in leadership, in the marketplace, in the private sector, whether as an entrepreneur or going into a larger established corporation? And I think a lot of many of my students will be entrepreneurs, which of course the Miami, the Life Center is all about, and what Greg was talking about, the great things he's doing at the Belmont. But these teachings are applicable whether you're an entrepreneur or the let's call it the corporate sector, an established player. Uh, so I also pedagogically what I do is I bring in different exemplars of women and men from different religious traditions to share about. First of all, I always ask them what are some of the big mistakes if they're a golfer, what mulligans, what could they have a do-over or a redo on, so that they're not just put up on a pedestal as being perfect, but they're human. And ask them, were there any decisions you took? And I don't just mean business judgment decisions, but there's an ethical component, a moral component, where afterwards you just didn't feel right. Maybe you didn't have the courage to step up to something to prevent something from happening, or maybe you succumbed or agreed and went with the flow on something actively that just bothered you ethically and morally. So they come in, and I'll bring in a Sabbath observant Jew. I'll bring in an evangelical Christian. I'll bring in a Muslim CEO. I'll bring in a Hindu. So just different traditions so that people can get role models instead of what we're fed with the media, where the corporate guys, whether it's Gordon Gekko greed or billions and so forth, that no, you can. The road may be a bit slower, a bit of the tortoise and the hare. The race may go longer, but the being ethical, being morally grounded, having a North Star, I think was a phrase also that Greg used, that's vitally important, vitally important. And so I want the students to be exposed to that. And they just sort of hang on every word as I interview these folks and come in. Uh, that I built the course around 5 questions, very creatively. I call it the 5 Qs of ethics. And I'm humbled and excited to say that Princeton University Press, we've just gone under contract with them. I'm taking essentially the course, which I've been teaching for 15 plus years. Yeah, thanks, Corey. And turning it into a book. And hopefully it'll be one that all of you on this call and others might be interested in as a way to take this course idea, the pedagogy, the resources, and put your own spin on it, obviously, your own personality, your own context, your own college or school, your own country, but a way to teach ethics a whole different way, a whole different way. So it's built around these 5 questions, which the working title of the book is The 5 Elements of Ethical Thinking, the 5 elements of ethical thinking, got to add that colon, succeeding without selling your soul, succeeding without selling your soul. Of course, should I take a minute and run through the 5 questions, or should I pause? What's best for you?
Yes, please. Let's hear
Okay.
those 5 questions.
All right, real quick. So first question, it's sort of may sound like a slow pitch over home plate, if you'll pardon the baseball metaphor, or an easy one. It's what is ethics? What is ethics? and I'll ask the students, and we'll kind of do a popcorn and exercise, like just wing it. Don't look it up. Just tell me what you think it is. Well, it's doing the right thing, or it's a system of thought, or it's a North Star, or ethics is what you do when it's what you ought to do, what you should do, or ethics is what you do when nobody's looking. So, I get these random exercises, but I press them to say, well, let's go a little bit deeper. That's all. It's not, none of that is incorrect, but let's go a little bit deeper. And I've come up with a one sentence definition of ethics that was actually pressed upon me. Ira Milstein, sadly just deceased a few months ago, earlier this year, is 93. He was the godfather of corporate governance. And back in the 70s and 80s, he really began helping large corporations increase their corporate governance. So he mentored me, and he asked me that question, and I was kind of embarrassed as an ethicist. I couldn't answer it other than just quoting, paraphrasing some other thinker. And so I came up with a definition of ethics, which is ethics is the art and discipline, which right there is two contradictory terms, right? Discipline, regimented process, art, whoa, creativity, art, music, whatever. So ethics is the art and discipline of discerning. That's a really strong word, discerning, not just thinking about it or winging it, but discerning the right, the good, and the fitting. And for those of you who are ethicists, broadly speaking, you could divide the intellectual history of ethics into kind of rules-based deontology, which I would call the right lens. The good lens is utilitarianism, teleology, outcomes-based, who benefits, who gets harmed by a decision. And the third, the fitting, is sort of character, virtue ethics, values, and so forth. My theory is that we're all like a Myers-Briggs personality test. We're predisposed to one of those three different ethical schools. And so, I want my students to have self-awareness. Wow, I never thought of myself. I'm a right kind of guy, a right, wrong, black and white guy, or whatever it may be, which also then equips you to know who in around the table with you. Maybe they're naturally a virtues person, or they're naturally a utilitarian. It can really enrich your conversations. So the right, the good, and the fitting action to take. So ethics is not just a theoretical exercise you do in the academy. Sooner or later, like in sports, the ball is in or out, it's fair or foul. You have to make a call. You capitalize it or do you expense it? You have to make a decision at some point. So the right, the good, and the fitting action to take, and here's the end of the long sentence, and having the creativity and courage to do it, and having the creativity and courage to do it. Because a lot of times we may know, I don't know about you folks, I've known what the best, the optimal ethical decision is, but do I have the guts to do it? It's particularly if I'm a voice of one and everyone else around the table saying, "Come on, Miller, let's just get going. Don't be a party pooper. This is no big deal. Everyone's doing it. Let's just do it." So that's question one. Question two is, what's your ethical source? And that's the way I find that people can get into the metaphysical question. Is it your mom, your grandma, your coach, your rabbi, your priest, whatever? Well, yeah, it's all those things, but where did they get that from? And then where did they get that from? And ultimately, you press into metaphysical questions. And most students have never thought about that. What's the source of your ethics? Because just the law alone certainly does not suffice. I mean, we all know apartheid was legal, slavery was legal. Are those morally correct, ethically correct? Of course not. So that's a real soul searching one for the students. What's your ethical source? Question three is, what's your ethical decision making framework? This is very interdisciplinary, the course. I draw on neuroscience, behavioral economics, behavioral psychology, neurology. So it's not just theology and philosophy and so forth that I look at. And what we've all learned, and I'm sure all of you know in this phone call, that our brain tricks us a lot of times. Our brain tricks us, and we ignore evidence to the contrary. We're looking for what we want to find. There's a whole bunch of subconscious factors that go on that impede robust ethical thinking and analysis. So when you're in the ethical gray zone, you have no idea what to do. You've never encountered the issue before. You need a framework to also offset some of your natural intellectual biases and human biases and misreads of a situation. And I don't mean biases in I don't know, like a racial sense or something, not to exclude that, but neurological biases. Our brain will trick us. So I have them all create their own ethical decision-making framework. Question four is, what's your public language? So how do you talk about this publicly? Do you ride in on a big white horse, being holier than thou, and tell everyone, well, no, like a noisy clanging gong. No one's going to listen to you if you do that. Do you go in and slap your hand on the say, well, the Bible says I should do this? Well, no, if you're in Bahrain, that's not going to go down so well. Or if you're in Saudi Arabia, like how do you think about other cultures? In Indonesia, how do you respect other cultures? And then also there's cultural differences. In some organizations, women are not supposed to talk if they're even in the room. In other organizations, male or female, the junior person at a meeting is not supposed to talk. You defer to seniority. So how do you cultivate a public language? How do you cultivate a public language to talk about ethical issues in a thoughtful, accessible way where people will listen to you? And Q5 is how do you stay ethically fresh? I don't know about you folks, but I know I have several people I know who have gotten fired for good folks, like I'm assuming everybody in this call, good folks who've done something stupid and been caught and they've lost their job. Sometimes their marriage, sometimes their career reputation. Two of my friends have some white collar folks have gone to jail for a white collar crime, and they were good people. Oh my gosh, what happened? So I want the students really to think, to recognize that they could do something that they know they ought not do, and how could they develop habits and disciplines with symbols and other things in their life to help them stay ethically fresh. So those are the five Qs. And with a bit of luck this time next year, the book will be out and I'd be glad to share the information. I don't know, Corey, if you have any questions, but I think that I've landed the plane on my 15-minute slot.
I love it. Nicely done. A question came through. What are the students most afraid of when they name the class without selling your soul?
Well, I think what they're afraid of isn't, I don't know if I'm quite answering the question, but I think they're often afraid of what their peers will think about the answers. I teach Socratically. So I will call on someone even if they haven't raised their hand. It's not to embarrass them, but I want them to practice public language. Uh, and they have, because I asked once, am I like this intimidating figure or something? And they said, no, we don't care what you think. That made me feel real good. They said, but we care what our friends think. So let's say someone has a traditional or more conservative position on a controversial topic, like, I don't know, abortion or whatever, climate control. They may be afraid to voice that position because they're going to think, well, three-quarters of my friends in this class, they're more progressive than I am, or vice versa, based on what your context is. So that's what I think they're afraid of peer mocking by their peers.
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you. We have maybe 2 minutes for another question. If I want to open it up to the floor. There was another question that came through. What does success look like? If we're doing the ethical entrepreneurship, like how do you know when the students have arrived?
Wow.
Just a minute or two. Yeah, just
Sure.
real briefly.
Yeah, I know the students have arrived. Of course, we never arrive. So I think part of success is knowing you're never successful, that there's setbacks, there's detours. And also, of course, the big, what do you mean by success? Is it making a lot of money? Is it having your product or idea become commercially viable? Is it the satisfaction of giving it a shot, even if it doesn't work? So I think entrepreneurs, particularly because they're taking the path less trod, that would be worth them reflecting. Well, maybe they should have a Q6 or something like, why am I doing this? Is it to solve a problem? Is it to get rich? Is it it's the vogue hip thing to do? They ought to think six, because then when you measure success is usually against a certain measurement. Like, did I have success running that race? Well, what's the race? Is it a 4-minute mile? Well, and I ran 6 minutes. Well, that's not a success. So what are you measuring yourself against? And I know some of the people in this call, and I think the Life Center might brings faith into that. So how does your faith define success? To whom much is given, much is expected. There's lots of things like that. This is what I press my students to say. I mean, the title is playful. It gives a nod to, by saying soul, it gives a nod to spirituality and religion and so forth. And I want my students to be successful, but I also want them to think, what does success mean? At what cost? And what are you trying to succeed in? And everyone's going to have a different answer, but many will never have actually answered that question. They'll just do what society says.
Hey, David, at the at the risk of not landing the plane on time because you already have so successfully done that, I saw several questions come up about like if you were to design a second course, like what would the follow-up course to this course be?
Well, that's a really interesting idea because I'm actually talking about that with my colleagues in by way of background, I run something called the Faith and Work Initiative at Princeton University. Just Google Faith and Work, Princeton University or Faith and Work, David Miller, and you'll find us. Um, and by the way, a lot of the interviews that I've done are also with different leaders are on the website under our Thought Leadership tab. I, I think I would, and also here thinking entrepreneur, I think I would challenge them to fast forward into a certain fact pattern or a situation they would like to be in, and then have them do more role playing as to how they would handle that. For instance, the final exam paper I give is essentially they have to answer the 5 Qs, the 5 questions, and then I put them into a virtual reality situation, not with goggles and everything, but conceptually saying you are distinguish yourself as a hotshot young software engineer at Volkswagen, say 5 years ago, and uh, you're married, you're in debt because you just bought a house and a car, and your spouse, you're about to have a kid, is pregnant, and you're part of the defeat device where Volkswagen was gaming the emissions program. So millions of cars were being sold with false representation of their emissions capability. What would you do? And oh, by the way, your boss says, "Hey, don't worry, we've run this by legal. It's all fine. We got your back." What would you do? So I think I would do. I just think it's a great, great, great question, Brett, and that's probably a lousy answer. But I think I would look at trying to do more practicing of more. That's why I use the word role play of the fundamentals that they learned in of the 5 questions in this course.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, David. We have a variety of time zones represented by people participating in this call. So wherever you are and whatever your needs are, please take 8-ish minutes to meet them. And we will resume at the hour. Thanks to Greg and David for starting us off.
Corey,
See you.
Brett, Craig, everybody, thanks a lot. Best wishes. I've got to hop, unfortunately. Take care.